The snow on the wire is heavy. It muffles the world. Private Kenji Tanaka stares at it from the thin glass of the barracks window. He does not feel the cold from the glass, not really. He only feels the cold inside. He is in Wisconsin. He has been here for 6 months. He is prisoner 1-1-0-4. And today, they are teaching him how to play. The leather of the baseball glove feels alien in his hands, softer than a rifle stock, heavier than the hilt of the blade his father told him to use, if this day ever came. This day. The day of his capture. The day of his shame. He was supposed to be ashamed. He was supposed to be dead. He was certainly supposed to be tortured. He was supposed to be screaming, or silent in defiance, as the Ki-chiku, the American demons, tore him apart. He is not. He is holding a baseball glove. And in the distance, over the frozen white expanse of the camp yard, he hears a sound he has not heard in 3 years. Laughter. Genuine, relaxed, laughter. It is the most terrifying sound he has ever heard. It is the sound of his soul unraveling. This is not the history we are taught. We are taught the beaches, the bombs, the grand strategies. We are not taught the silence of the mind breaking. We are not taught the psychological warfare waged not with threats, but with kindness. The stories that exist in the margins of history, in the classified reports and the forgotten diaries, are often the ones that tell us the most about the nature of human conflict. The story of the Japanese prisoners of war in America is one of those stories. It is a story of an enemy indoctrinated for death, who was met instead with baseball and ice cream. And for many, that was a brutality all its own. If you find value in exploring these forgotten corners of the past, these heavy, complex truths, subscribe. There are many more silences to examine. The code was simple. It was absolute. It was breathed in with the smoke of the homeland shrines and beaten in with the rigid discipline of the Imperial Academy. It was Bushido, resurrected for a modern, mechanized war. A soldier of the Emperor does not surrender. Surrender was not a tactical option, it was a spiritual impossibility. It was a stain so deep it erased your name from your family, your memory from the world. The military code of conduct issued by General Hideki Tojo in 1941, the Senjinkun, was explicit. It stated, "Do not live in shame as a prisoner." The implication was clear. Death was preferable. Death was required. You were to die for the Emperor, a gyokusai, a shattering jewel. You were to take 10 of the enemy with you, or failing that, 1. Failing that, you were to take your own life. The grenade held to the chest. The final, desperate banzai charge into machine guns. The cold application of a blade to the stomach. These were the accepted, honorable ends. On the brutal, volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, or in the dense, rotting jungles of Saipan, this code was put to the ultimate test. The Japanese soldier fought with a ferocity that stunned Allied forces. They fought from caves, from spider holes, from tunnels. They fought when they were starving. They fought when their weapons were broken. They fought when they were on fire. They were conditioned to see the enemy, the Americans, as nothing short of Ki-chiku, brutal, demonic beasts. American propaganda posters might have depicted the Japanese as subhuman, but Japanese propaganda depicted the Americans as sadistic monsters who would inflict unimaginable torture before a humiliating death. They were told American soldiers mutilated the dead, collected gold teeth, and took no prisoners. And in the chaotic, desperate brutality of the Pacific Front, sometimes, they were right. The fear was palpable. It was a greater motivator than victory. So imagine the moment of capture. It is not a clean, storybook surrender. It is a moment of profound, chaotic failure. Perhaps he is concussed from an artillery shell. He wakes up, the smell of cordite and his own blood thick in his nostrils, and an American boot is on his chest. Perhaps he is one of 20 men left in a collapsed bunker, out of ammunition, out of water, and the advancing Americans use a flamethrower not to kill, but just to encourage. They flood the cave with smoke, and the soldiers stumble out, hands raised, blinded by the tropical sun, choking on their own shame. This is the moment Private Tanaka, or Private Sato, or Lieutenant Endo, expected to die. This is the moment they had trained for. They clench their jaw, ready for the butt of a rifle to the skull, the bayonet to the gut. They are prepared for the torture they were promised. This is the moment of the first dissonance. The boot on the chest does not press down. The rifle is not fired. Instead, a rough hand pulls him to his feet. A canteen is shoved at him. Water. Not muddy trench water, but clean water. His hands are bound, yes. He is searched, roughly. But the expected execution does not come. He is marched, stumbling, with other captured men. He sees the faces of his comrades. They are not defiant. They are not proud. They are empty. They are ghosts. They have failed the code. They have lived. They are marched past the American lines, past men who look at them not with the burning hatred of a demon, but with exhaustion. Or curiosity. Or even, bafflingly, a kind of pity. They are herded onto a truck. They are given a cigarette. The cigarette is a psychological weapon. The water is a psychological weapon. The absence of the expected brutality is the most disorienting blow of all. He is processed. His name is taken. His wounds, a gash on his arm from shrapnel, are cleaned. A medic, a young man who looks barely old enough to shave, swabs the wound with antiseptic that stings, but it is not the sting of torture. It is the sting of medicine. He is given a blanket. He is put into a holding pen. And he waits. He waits for the interrogation. He waits for the pain. He waits for the end. He waits for days. He is moved to a ship. A massive, gray transport. He is herded into the hold with hundreds of other men. The ship's horn blows. They are moving. They are leaving the war. They are sailing away. And he is still alive. The shame is so profound it is a physical sickness. He retches over the side, but there is nothing in his stomach. He is a prisoner. He is a non-person. He has crossed the one line that was never to be crossed. The journey across the Pacific is a blur of this cognitive fog. He is fed. It is not good food, but it is food. It is regular. He is not beaten. The guards are distant, bored. They are farm boys from Ohio or mechanics from New York, and they seem to regard the prisoners as cargo. Nothing more. The Japanese officers in the group try to maintain discipline. They hold small, furtive meetings. They reinforce the code. They whisper that this humanity, is a trick. It is the American way of fattening the pig before the slaughter. They are being taken to a special camp, a place where the real torture will begin, away from the eyes of the front. This is the only thing that makes sense. This is the only way to reconcile the reality they are experiencing with the indoctrination that defines their entire world. They must be sailing toward a secret, American version of the camps they know their own military runs. They must be headed for a Unit 731, but with American faces. They cling to this fear. It is the only familiar thing left. They need the Americans to be monsters. Because if the Americans are not monsters, then what were they? What was the war? What was the Emperor? The questions are too terrible to form. So they wait. They wait for the land. They wait for the torture. They wait for the confirmation that their world, built on sacrifice and death, has not already collapsed. The land, when it comes, is not the scarred, volcanic rock of the islands. It is green. It is vast. They are put on trains. Trains with glass windows. They are not cattle cars, not the suffocating darkness of the transports they themselves had used to move prisoners in Manchuria or the Philippines. They are simple, functional passenger cars, and the windows are not barred, merely guarded. They press their faces to the glass, those who dare, and watch a continent scroll past. They see farms. They see rolling hills, massive, towering mountains of granite, endless plains of grass. They see cities in the distance that are not on fire. They see a country, untouched. This, too, is a form of psychological warfare. The propaganda had insisted America was stretched thin, that its resources were dwindling. The reality scrolling past the window is one of overwhelming, unbothered, plenty. The sheer scale of the American landmass is a weapon. The emptiness of it is a weapon. The guards on the train are few. They seem unconcerned with an uprising. Where would they go? They are thousands of miles from any ocean, surrounded by a language they do not speak, in a land that seems impossibly large. They arrive at their destination. Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. Or Camp Hearn, Texas. Or one of dozens of other camps scattered across the American interior. The gates are tall. The wire is real. The guard towers are manned. This is familiar. This is what a camp should look like. The prisoners are marched off the train, the snow crunching under their ill-fitting boots in Wisconsin, or the dust coating their tongues in Texas. They are lined up. They are counted. The hardliners in the group exchange glances. Now. This is it. The processing. The real processing. They are marched into a large, wooden building. It smells of soap. They are told to strip. This is it. The humiliation. The prelude to the pain. They stand naked, shivering, a group of men who were once soldiers of the emperor. They are ashamed. And then, they are sprayed. Not with chemicals. Not with poison. With hot water. They are deloused, a standard, impersonal military procedure. But for men who have not been truly clean in years, the shock of the hot water is profound. It is a sensory assault. It strips away not just the grime of the journey, but the hard-earned filth of the front line. It is an intimacy they did not ask for. They are scrubbed, processed, and then, clothed. They are handed new uniforms. Not their imperial ones. Not rags. But U.S. Army surplus, dyed a different color, with the letters PW stenciled on the back. They are given boots. Boots that fit. They are given coats. Real, warm coats against the Wisconsin cold. This is wrong. This is deeply, fundamentally wrong. Prisoners are supposed to be in rags. Prisoners are supposed to be cold. They are supposed to be miserable. This is the rule. This is the natural order of war. They are marched to their barracks. They are identical to the U.S. Army barracks just on the other side of the fence. They are not cramped, dirt floor hovels. They have cots. With mattresses. And blankets. 2 blankets each. The shock is so profound it manifests as silence. The men just stand there. They do not know what to do. The guards leave. They lock the door from the outside. And the prisoners are left, alone. In this, clean, warm, room. The officers, The hardliners are furious. They stalk the barracks. It is a trick, they hiss. Do not be fooled by this. This is a way to make us weak. They are trying to soften us for the interrogation. They need it to be a trick. Because the alternative is that everything they were taught about the enemy, about the world, is a lie. And then comes the food. The first meal. A bell rings. They are marched to a mess hall. It is clean. They line up. They are handed trays. Metal trays. And onto the trays go food. Not just rice. Not just fish heads and watery soup. There is bread. White, soft bread. There is butter. There is meat. A stew. And coffee. Or milk. Milk. They sit. They stare at the tray. This is more food, and better food, than they had received as active-duty soldiers on the front. It is better than what their families were eating back home, under the rationing and the bombings. To eat this feast, is a betrayal. It is a form type of collaboration. Some men, the most devout, refuse. They sit, stoic, hands in their laps. Others, the hunger is too much. The pragmatic, the broken, the ones who are just tired. They pick up the spoon. The spoon feels heavy. They lift it to their mouths. The first bite is shame. It is the taste of surrender. It is the taste of life. It is delicious. And this is the most terrifying part. The simple, animal pleasure of a full stomach. The warmth spreading through their bodies. The coffee. It is an assault on their identity. The Geneva Convention of 1929, which the United States had ratified and Japan had not, though pledged to follow, mandated that prisoners of war be treated humanely. That they be fed, clothed, and housed in a manner equivalent to the detaining power's own soldiers. The Americans were following the rules. And in doing so, they were psychologically dismantling men who were raised on a different set of rules entirely. The Japanese code had prepared them for brutality. It had prepared them for how to die in the face of torture. It had not prepared them for how to live in the face of bureaucratic, regulated decency. They were not prisoners of war. They were guests. Guests of the emperor, as the bitter joke would later go. Guests who were being systematically, efficiently, broken, by simple, unadulterated, kindness. The guards were not beasts. They were bored. They were guarding a fence in the middle of nowhere. The enemy was not trying to kill them. The enemy was eating. And in that mess hall, in the silence of chewing, the real war, the psychological war, had begun in earnest. The mind cannot exist in a state of sustained, high-level cognitive dissonance. It must find a new equilibrium. The reality of the American POW camp was the new reality. The rules were simple. The gates were locked. The food was plentiful. The brutality was absent. And in its place, the American military command, adhering to the Geneva Convention, introduced two new, destabilizing forces, labor and leisure. The convention allowed for prisoners, below officer rank, to be put to work, and to be paid for it. This was not slave labor. It was not the brutal, life-stealing work of a Siberian gulag or a Japanese copper mine. They were paid 80 cents a day. They worked on local farms, harvesting vegetables. They worked in camp workshops, repairing clothes. They worked jobs. And with the scrip they earned, they could go to the camp canteen. The PX. The canteen was, perhaps, the single most powerful weapon of psychological destruction in the entire camp. It was where the lie of the American propaganda was completely, utterly, annihilated. Because in the canteen, a Japanese soldier, a man who had been told the American economy was collapsing, could buy cigarettes. He could buy Coca-Cola. He could buy chocolate bars. He could buy magazines, and see pictures of American life, the cars, the women, the food, and realize the scale of the industrial and cultural power he had been sent to fight. He could buy ice cream. That single, simple, luxury. A frozen, sugary, dairy-based impossibility. What kind of nation, what kind of enemy, wastes this much resources on pleasure? What kind of army gives ice cream to its prisoners? This was the American decadence they had heard about. But it was not weak. It was overwhelming. It was proof of a power so vast, so effortless, that it could afford to be kind to its defeated enemies. And then, there was the leisure. The camp command, worried about morale, not for the prisoners' sake, but because bored prisoners are dangerous prisoners, actively encouraged recreation. They were given space. They were given equipment. And the Japanese prisoners, being human, began to organize. They held sumo tournaments, the grunts and shouts of their national sport echoing strangely off the Wisconsin pines. They built dojo for kendo and judo, the sharp clack of bamboo swords a memory of a life that felt ancient. They staged intricate, beautiful kabuki plays, creating costumes from paper and blankets, makeup from berries and stolen chalk. They formed orchestras. They planted gardens. They built elaborate, beautiful Japanese gardens in the middle of Texas, raking the sand into patterns that spoke of a home they could never, honorably, return to. And most bizarrely, they learned to play baseball. The all-American game. At first, it was a curiosity. The guards played it. The prisoners watched. And then, a bat was offered. A glove was tossed. And the game, which had already been popular in Japan before the war, became an obsession. It was a structure. It had rules. It was competitive. It was safe. Leagues were formed. Barracks played barracks. They played with a fierce, burning intensity. It was a way to fight. A way to win or lose, that did not involve shame. A U.S. Army report from Camp McCoy noted, with some amusement, that the Japanese prisoners played the game with a skill and enthusiasm that was remarkable. They were good at it. They argued calls. They cheered home runs. They were, for a few hours, not prisoners. They were not shameful. They were just men. This was the danger. This, normalization. This, humanity. The hardliners, the Imperial loyalists, they saw it. They saw the poison in the ice cream. They saw the corruption in the baseball game. They saw the weakness in the warm barracks. This kindness, this mundanity, was eroding the Bushido spirit. It was defanging them. It was making them soft. They railed against it. They held secret courts. They beat prisoners who seemed too friendly with the guards. They tried to enforce the old hierarchies, the old code. But the code was built for war. It was built for suffering. It was built for death. It had no defense against baseball. It had no answer for ice cream. The American camp commanders, men like Colonel George H. W. Schmidt, were not psychologists. They were administrators. They were wardens. Their job was containment and compliance. They were, in essence, accidentally running the most successful deprogramming operation of the entire war. They were not trying to break the Japanese mind. They were just following the rules. The U.S. Army published magazines for the prisoners in Japanese. They set up libraries. They offered classes. Classes in English. Classes in American democracy. They showed them movies. And in this flood of information, this wave of normality, the foundations of the imperial indoctrination crumbled. The prisoners were not being tortured into giving up secrets. They were being educated into seeing the lie. They were not prisoners. They were students. And the curriculum was America. The cognitive dissonance was reaching a breaking point. The mind had to choose. And in the face-off overwhelming, mundane, decency, the old code broke. When a belief system shatters, it does not do so quietly. It explodes. The psychological pressure that had been building inside the wire broke. But it did not break outwards, against the American guards. It broke inwards. The real war, the most brutal war, was not fought between the Japanese and the Americans. It was fought between the Japanese and the Japanese. The camps fractured. They split into 2, then 3, then a dozen warring factions, a microcosm of the collapsing empire they represented. The central conflict was simple: the hardliners versus the cooperators. The patriots versus the Inu, the dogs. The hardliners were the men who clung to the Senjinkun code. They were often the officers, the NCOs, the true believers. They saw the baseball games, the movie nights, the English classes, as a betrayal. A deep, spiritual pollution. They saw the men who participated, the men who laughed at the American comedies, who grew fat on the American food, who spoke the enemy's language, as collaborators. Traitors. Worse than the Ki-chiku, because they were the Ki-chiku. They were the enemy within. These hardliners enforced their rule with the only thing they had left, fear. They held kangaroo courts, in the dead of night, in the dark corners of the barracks. They beat fellow prisoners. They shunned them. They killed them. There were murders in the camps. Men found hanging ruled a suicide. But everyone knew. It was the code. It was the old way. And then, there were the cooperators. Or, as the hardliners saw them, the Inu. The dogs. These were not necessarily men who loved America. They were pragmatists. They were men who saw the reality of their situation. They were men who had families back home they wanted to see again. They were men who had listened. They had read the camp magazines. They had seen the newsreels. They knew. Japan was losing. This was the ultimate, unspoken, truth. The war was lost. The emperor's divinity was a lie. The Bushido code was a suicide pact. And they chose life. They chose the baseball game. They chose the ice cream. They chose English class. They engaged with the camp administration. They became informants. Not for military intelligence, not really. But they told the guards who the hardliners were. They pointed out the men who were enforcing the old code. They did it to survive. To stop the beatings. To live. The American camp commanders encouraged this. Of course they did. It was counterintelligence. It was pragmatic. They segregated the camps. They identified the hardliners, the troublemakers, and shipped them to special camps. Camps for the uncooperative. Places like Camp Tule Lake in California. They separated the patriots from the pragmatists. And in doing so, they cemented the fracture. They broke the cohesion of the Japanese fighting spirit. Not with bullets. Not with torture. But with administrative paperwork. With transfers. With segregation. This created a paranoia that was worse than the front line. On the front line, you knew who the enemy was. He wore a different uniform. He spoke a different language. In the camps, the enemy looked just like you. He slept in the bunk next to you. He ate at the same table. He spoke your language. The silence in the barracks was terrifying. Was the man next to you a hardliner who would judge you for taking extra bread? Was he an emu who would report you to the Americans for whispering about the emperor? The trust that binds a military unit evaporated. It was gone. And into this void stepped the Americans. With questionnaires. With interviews. Not torture. Just questions. What do you think of the war? What do you think of the emperor? What do you want after the war? And the prisoners talked. Some lied. But many talked. They confessed. They unburdened themselves. The psychological dam broke. They told the Americans everything. Not military secrets. They didn't have any. They told them their fears. Their doubts. Their anger. Their shame. This was the real interrogation. It was therapy. It was deprogramming. The men who had been raised to never speak, to never question, were suddenly given permission to do both. And the result was a psychological unraveling. Some men broke. They could not reconcile the two worlds. The world of the emperor. And the world of ice cream. The suicide rate in the camps was not insignificant. But it wasn't always murder. Sometimes it was just escape. The only honorable exit left from an impossible situation. The code was shattered. And all that was left were broken men trying to figure out how to live. August 1945. The end did not come as a victory. It came as a radio broadcast. A faint, static-filled voice. The Gyokyuan Hoso. The voice of the jewel. For the first time ever, the Japanese people, and the prisoners, thousands of miles away, heard the voice of their God. Their Emperor. Hirohito. And the voice was human. It was high-pitched. It was reedy. And it spoke of surrender. It spoke of enduring the unendurable. It spoke of peace. For the hardliners in the camps, this was the final impossibility. It could not be. It was a trick. An American fabrication. They refused to believe it. For weeks. Some 4 months. They insisted the war was still on. That this was the ultimate test of their faith. They continued their secret drills. They prepared for a final battle inside the wire. They became even more violent toward the Inu, the believers. But for most, the Emperor's voice was permission. It was release. The war was over. The code was officially dead. The shame was lifted. Or rather, transformed. It was no longer their personal failure. It was a national catastrophe. They were no longer cowards. They were survivors. The Emperor himself had said to live. And now a new fear began. The fear of going home. What was home? They saw the photographs. The newsreels that the Americans now showed them. Tokyo in ashes. Hiroshima gone. Nagasaki gone. The country they left did not exist. And they were returning as what? As prisoners. As men who had eaten ice cream while their families starved. As men who had played baseball while their cities burned. The repatriation was slow. It took months. Years for some. They were processed out. They were given new clothes. Civilian clothes. They were put back on the ships. And as they sailed back across the Pacific, this time east to west, they carried with them not just their few possessions. Not just the English they had learned. Not just the memory of Coca-Cola and baseball. They carried a profound secret. They were the first wave of deprogrammed Japanese. They had seen the enemy. And he was not a demon. He was a warden. He was a teacher. He was a bored kid from Ohio. They had seen America. Not the myth. Not the propaganda. But the reality. The overwhelming power. The staggering wealth. The baffling decency. When they landed in a ruined Yokohama, they were met with suspicion. They were the shameful. The surrendered. But they were also healthy. They were fed. They were not broken by torture. They were broken by confusion. And they became, in a strange way, the bridge. The first bridge between two nations that had tried to annihilate each other. Robert C. Doyle, in his work, writes of the profound, psychological retooling that occurred. The American strategy of humane treatment wasn't an accident. It was policy. It was the Geneva Convention. But its effect was pure psychological warfare. It dismantled an entire ideology. It proved that the enemy propaganda was a lie. And in doing so, it made the post-war occupation of Japan possible. It planted the seeds of the alliance to come. We never think about this. We think of the war in terms of violence, of bombs, of death. But this battle was fought with coffee, with clean sheets, with baseball gloves. It was a war of mundanity, a war of cognitive dissonance. And in the end, the silence of a mind confronting a kindness it cannot understand can be a far more powerful force than any explosion. It is the sound of a world ending, and a new one struggling to be born in the ashes.